Welcome again to Straight Up Now Tell Me, Christian conversation that's straight without a chaser. And so we have made it. We have effectively made it through another Christmas season, another holiday season. And if we look tired, it's probably because we are, because the holidays can take a lot out of us. And although it is a wonderful time of year, it is not without, I guess, some stressors. It's not without a whole lot of hustle and bustle at times. But we have made it through that wonderful time of year and actually into a whole new year. But I wanted to talk today, before we get too far gone, on a whole topic of being offended. And so sometimes during the holidays, we know things can go awry, and it's something about bringing the whole family together into one place, even the extended family, that can cause things that have happened before to kind of bubble back to the top of our minds, or it can actually, cause new things to occur. But it's something to that, and I don't know that we've spent a lot of times, or enough time, I should say, actually dealing with that, or actually having those conversations. So I wanted to pause for a moment today to sort of talk through that, to give us a moment to talk through it. And so whether or not it's the extended family, like I mentioned, or whether or not it is the whole notion of going to our in-laws' homes and just being in that space where there may have been, I guess, a little bit of tension in the family, or even in having them come to our home. Or it could be, I guess, something as simple as just really, facing the holiday season, whether you do it amongst people or not, or whether we do it by ourselves. There can be something to that. And to the whole host of, I guess, holiday movies that we face for like a month and a half by way of Hallmark, or, Lifetime Christmas series, or wherever we find them. So I think it can be challenging to think through it because, again, even with the movie series, a lot of that can cause us to really think back on the fact that maybe, our life has not mirrored what we're seeing on screen. Maybe, there's been some offenses that happened, when we were growing up, between our siblings and ourselves, or maybe between our parents and ourselves, or maybe anyone that we've had to deal with. And when we see it play out on screen, on Hallmark or whatever, the movie, wherever we find them, the movies is what I'm trying to say. It just causes something to creep back up to the forefront of our minds. And so it reminds us of how we may have been offended in some way. So whether, again, it's a long time thought process that where we're remembering things, or whether it is actually, something new that came up, or whether it's some unresolved issues in the family between siblings, between parents, between, anyone who might appear, I think we need to pause for a moment just to have that conversation. And so just by way of an example, we could face, small things in a family where, one family member has been known to say things that are inappropriate to us. Oh, at each family gathering, oh, you're fat. or you've gained weight, or, whatever the case may be. And so that can be, depending on, excuse me for real, that could be, very offensive in how it's said, or even in how, whom it's said in front of. And so, or it could be something even, we might find to be even more egregious, where there's just been a conflict between siblings. And it could be around almost anything. It could be financial, where there's been, money that someone has lent someone and that was never repaid. Or it could be a situation where, I guess, siblings have just, they just have not really resolved things and learned to get along. And then, Christmas time, or if we do Christmas dinner or anything like that, that is the time when we are faced with having to face those people again. And so again, I want to talk about us, about being offended at Christmas time or at any time, and really to help us, find a pathway forward from that. And so what I'll say first and foremost is that love covers a multitude of missteps, of mishaps that occur between people, of misdeeds even. Love covers, even wrongdoing that we might see as just flat out wrongdoing. Love can cover that. And we're not asking that you kind of sign up for that behavior, certainly not. And we're not asking that you give them a pass per se on any behavior if you've been offended by someone. But what we are saying, or what I am suggesting, is that you actually forgive them. And so before, I know the mere mention of the word, having to forgive someone for something that was done, maybe even intentionally, that is almost injurious in itself, right? So we're not trying to skirt over that by any stretch of the imagination here. And before we go radio black on this podcast, and before everyone jumps off, I just want to, be clear and say that, what, forgiving someone and continuing on with them are two very separate, different things. And so hear me clearly, so by saying that, by requesting that you forgive, we're not saying that you have to continue on with this person or even, allow their behavior in your presence. But we are saying that, the process is necessary for us to all, at moments to forgive. And again, I know forgiveness can almost sound like a curse word sometimes, depending on the offense. But what I want to pause right now and to also say is that we are well aware here at, Straight Up Now Tell Me, that there are people who are repeat offenders. There are people who are in a cycle of things that they continue to do. And so we're not trying to placate anything, and we're not trying to say that you continue on with them. So we know for a fact that, if she's a cheater, she's a cheater. And so we're not condoning that behavior. If he's a thief, he's a thief, right? And so if their behavior is just something that we find very atrocious is what I'm trying to say. So we're not trying to placate that. We're not trying to skirt past that. And so we recognize that. And what we will say is that they themselves need to really seek after God concerning that behavior and really pull it together, and then to circle back to us, if they want to be a part of our space. And so that is on them. And so we're not saying that you overlook that by any stretch of the imagination. We're not trying to say that you play pretend and be pretentious, or even try to pretend again that behavior is not there and to go on with that. No, that's not healthy, and that is not anything of God. But we can continue to pray, on their behalf, and that we can continue to hope the best for them, and we certainly can begin the process of forgiving their behavior. And so the other thing I want to pause just to say, honestly, is that we recognize that there is criminal behavior. And so there are situations where crimes have been committed, even in a situation of, that involves family members. And so we're not trying to say, and please hear me clearly, that when there has been a crime committed, there are cases that when there has been physical abuse, which is a crime, by the way, and then there are cases where there have been sexual abuse, of adults and children and things of that nature, where there has been even verbal and emotional abuse, where someone is constantly putting someone else down and dragging them through the mud and really, being, I guess, narcissistic in effect. And so we're not saying that, this is, it is certainly behavior that can be forgiven, but it is criminal behavior. And we're not even trying to promote in any way, shape, or form that you continue in that situation, or you allow that in your space. No, a crime is a crime is a crime that needs to be, addressed, by the legal system, and certainly by adjustments to our own behavior. So we're not factoring all of that into this. But again, those are offenses that can, with God's help, be forgiven per se, but they are certainly outside of the purview of what we're suggesting for tips on today of how to handle those situations. So again, please stick with us for a moment. Don't cut the podcast completely off. We're not saying again that you have to continue with anyone's behavior that's inappropriate. And again, if someone's a narcissist, they are a narcissist. That is a fact. We do not cover our eyes and try to pretend like that's not the case. And again, if she's a cheater, she's a cheater. If he's a thief, he's a thief. We need to recognize that, and then we need to, back up. And then they have the responsibility of really correcting their own behavior and pulling it together, and and really seeking counsel and things that they need to do, and then maybe possibly coming back, circling back to us, and then seeking whether or not we want to continue on with them even after they've done all of that. So hear me clearly, though. I just wanted to say that to really acknowledge that those are some things that actually need to be said. So that is totally outside, again, of what we're talking about today. But for situations where there have been family offenses, simply like long-term things that have gone awry, where people need to surely possibly still work on their behavior, but where we need to also consider, what God would have us to do in those situations and work towards forgiving, Aunt Susan, if she's the one who's always saying, hey, you're divorced again. Or, to forgive our brother, say, hey, even if there was a long-term offense where maybe he may have dated someone that we wanted to date, years ago, and or maybe married to somebody we used to date, right? Or things like that. We can work towards those items, and I wanted to work with those today. So a long way around, but I did want to pause to say, just to acknowledge all of that. But I want to say, once again, that, that love covers a multitude of missteps. In families, where their family gatherings, where their in-laws are concerned, where, even, our parents are concerned, if they made some mistakes in our eyes, when we were coming up, if they weren't there for us, then we can certainly, let God help us begin the whole process of forgiving that behavior and really working through it, because it does more, forgiveness does more for us than it'll do for anyone around us. And I just wanted to be clear about that as well. So again, I want to welcome you a second time to Straight Up Now Tell Me. And I do recognize, again, it's hard to hear the word forgiveness. And so I wanted to, in an effort to be transparent, to share something with you today on the fact that, God had to teach me to forgive. And it has been a journey in and of itself, because that is not something that I think I was born, knowing how to do. And so for whatever reason, that was a struggle for me. But I will say that God took time with me, walked me through the process of learning how to forgive, and really teaching me that, there is more ways to handle, conflict or a situation than having to, exit the situation of itself. So God, one thing that he shared, and I'll be honest with you, is that God will tee us up regarding our next move. And so sometimes there's a time to to stay, there's a time to go, but God will tee us up regarding all of that if we allow him to. And so if we allow him in, then he will do that, certainly walk through life with us and really give us the the best signaling, the best timing to handle everything, and the best advice if we allow him to. And so I wanted to share that on this morning. And so what I learned is that, God will take his time with us. And the way you learn how to forgive is by having an opportunity to forgive. And so in order to do that, there has to be an offense. And so that is tough. And what I learned is I'll forgive you in a New York minute. I don't need to learn that lesson again, because the only way I was able to learn it was by being offended by people and really having a chance to really practice the whole notion of, forgiving. And so there had to be a practice field. So you have to practice that. And so you have to be offended. It's maybe sometimes in some egregious ways. And then you have to learn to put the principles that God is trying to teach us into practice in order to really, perfect that. And so again, that was a process that God took me through, and I certainly, I get it. And so I've learned that, and I know, and I'll share that with you because I want you to know that I know it's not easy. It's not even easy to hear it sometimes, but in the process may not be super easy, but God will walk with you through it if you allow him to. And trust me, being on the other side of it is a lot healthier than not being. So again, we're talking about, the whole notion of being offended and how to walk through that on today, and how to get to a place that's healthy, for us and for persons around us. And so we know that a lot of times by being parents, and as we deal with our teens or with other, our young adults or whatever age child that we have, is that we can factor in the love when they're making, missteps. And really it helps us to kind of open up the pathway to really wanting to and really being successful of really helping to strengthen the relationship after, there has been an infraction. So how do we get it done? You're like, Patrice, I hear you, I'm with you. I'm at least trying to be with you. And so how do we, get this whole ball rolling with the whole process of learning to forgive an offense, really getting on the other side of being offended? And so what I will say is that we do it by, allowing God to help. So we do it with God's help. And so what I'll say, first and foremost is that God is love. And what I mean by that is that, love is an essential part of God's identity. And so God knows a lot about how to lovingly move past, an offense that has occurred, or how to really lovingly grow from that. And so we do it by allowing God to help us, by, getting closer to God, and also by, going out and getting counseling. And so when I say that, I said what I'm recommending is that we find someone who's actually also trying to listen to God, and who's also, a licensed counselor who can actually help us walk through some of the deeper things, if there are, truly deeper things that we have to deal with in order to get to a point where we can forgive. So we do it by, drawing closer to God, and also by, going out getting the counseling that we need. And there's nothing wrong with that. Counseling is a healthy thing. And I have to pause there to say that. And it's a good thing. And so is drawing near to God as well. And so those two things. And so what are we going after, as we get closer to God, and as we seek counseling and go find a good, registered, qualified counselor to help us work through things, and a Christian counselor if we can, that would be, even, 100% better, who has those same qualities that I just mentioned. So how, what are we going after, when we get closer to God, and when we get the counseling set up and we actually go to the sessions? So what we are going after is really, teaching ourselves, or relearning how to be, kind to this person who may have offended us, or these persons who may have forgiven us, and how to be patient with them once again. And so we're going after that as well. And how not to be rude in their presence and when they're around. And again, they don't have to be our best friends, and we don't have to continue on necessarily in a relationship with them if their behavior does not warrant that. And we've talked about that a little bit earlier in the podcast. And again, so we recognize criminal behavior is criminal behavior, and so we do not continue on in their space. So we recognize, people who are in a cycle of doing the things that they're doing, and repeat offenders as being repeat offenders. And like I said, a cheat is a cheat. We don't continue on with that. But we do, in barring all of that, seek to get counseling, and actually to let God speak to us by whatever means that we're able to hear God. Sometimes it's by way of, putting on a favorite, Christian or gospel song. We can hear God speak, or by, even, sometimes it's even in worship. If you are involved in a congregational ministry, or sometimes it's even just asking God to speak, and God can use anything to speak to us, anything. And I tell people all the time, God spoke to me through the movie Shrek about trying to be a loner. And so God was able to effectively talk to me and speak to me, through, watching that movie itself. So God will go to any length to help guide us if we want that guidance. So again, by moving closer to God and getting the counseling we need, we have to relearn to be patient in their presence, in the presence of people who have offended us. We have to learn how to be kind, once again, in that presence. And we have to learn how not to rejoice in wrongdoing where they're concerned. And so we don't want to be super excited, when things go awry in their life, because, hey, they deserved it. So we don't want to be, have that mindset per se. So we want to get to a space where we don't rejoice where there's a wrongdoing, where they're concerned, and where we can actually, be, we can actually pray with or for them, right? If they're a Christian and they're, and they're around. And so, that certainly could be a tool in our tool belt to offer you to pray, hey, before the meal starts, hey, whatever, and so those are things that we're working towards through, drawing closer to God, and by seeking counseling, if it's a deeper hurt, in a situation where we need counsel, right? And so those are things I wanted to bring to the forefront. But most of all, we are relearning to do the things in their presence that we may have known how to do at one time, or we may have never known how to do where they're concerned, be it, our in-laws or whoever. And so those are some things. And also I want to say that, getting the counseling that we need, or, opening ourselves up to allow God to speak to us, and doing both, those two things, then, we can also learn, or work towards, learning to have hope for them again in the situation, to hope that, the situation can get better, to hope that their lives are better, even though, that they've been someone who has offended us. but that they can also, grow. We can hope that they can also grow beyond that and to be a person, or persons who no longer do that. So again, drawing closer to God and getting the counseling that we need, those are two things that can help us, work towards relearning all of these things, and really learning, and also learning how to see them and the situation differently in the process. And so, counseling will help in a lot of regards in that space. And certainly, drawing closer to God will help us as well. And again, it'll help us prayerfully, see the situation differently, maybe as God sees the situation, and to look at the person differently as somebody who may have been in a space where they've become, embittered or become unhappy because of some things that have gone awry in their lives, and maybe even be an example, maybe even allow us to be an example of how, they can, see and actually change some things in their own space. And so again, how do we get that done? How do we, get to a place where we can move beyond an offense that has occurred into this space of being able to forgive it? We do it, by drawing closer to God and allowing God to help guide us through the process, and also by getting the counseling that we need in order to relearn some things, to increase some things that are in our tool belt, to really learn how to move beyond, an offense. And so we do the hard work. We have to retool, and we have to relearn some things and allow God to speak by whatever means that, we're able to find Him. And so we can do it a lot of times, by listening to a broadcast, and on the way to work. And it's a good quality broadcast, a Christian broadcast, and where God is able to speak to us. And so we're able to find that time that we need to allow God in to help guide us. And so I know, our lives can be busy, and so I don't skirt past that as well, but there we can creatively get to that space where we allow God in and allow God time to speak, is what I'm saying. And before I hop off today, I wanted to reiterate, that God is love, and that God has given us some practical examples of how to love and how to forgive. And He's certainly painted a picture for us of that in a number of ways. But one way that I wanted to mention is simply by a parable that, that is found in the Word of God, that actually a parable that Jesus Christ spoke of and taught. And it's known as the parable of the prodigal son. And so in that in and of itself, we find a dad who's actually has two sons. And, he's, I'm surely done the best he can to be everything that they needed him to be. But we find that one young man, his younger son, actually, grows up, becomes of age. And he's like, you know what, I'm out, give me my inheritance, give me, what is due to me. I'm out of here, I'm exiting the building, I'm out of this place. And so that is an opportunity that where a space where his dad could truly have been offended. And most, parents may have been offended by that, in that, you have a son who's asking for his inheritance and you're still alive. That's offensive enough. But then also so that child can leave, and really because he's out of here. That's kind of his mindset. And so, his dad, lovingly decides to adhere to what his son has said. And he, divides up his wealth. He gives half, a portion, whatever portion that was due to the older son as well. And to the son, the younger son, who's asking for it now. And so that's totally a space where his dad could have been offended. But, the picture that, God is painting for us in this story is that of a loving God and a loving father, practically here, whose son has, done something that could be deemed offensive. But, his dad, certainly doesn't take the route of being offended immediately. But he kind of, for whatever reason, decides he's going to do what the son has asked. But as the story goes on, we find the young man has, not only asked for the money, but, there's rumors that he's outspending, that he's left home and outspending his dad's fortune on, wild living. And so even, there's accounts of him spending it on prostitutes and really just squandering the whole wealth. And so, but then the thing happens is that, life certainly lifes, as we say. And the young man finds himself actually, with all the money that he had inherited gone. And so, but the young man, even in that, he finds himself, in a spot where he's doing some tough living. He's having to clean the stalls, clean up after pigs, and he's hungry. And he's like, he would have, gladly, taken anything to eat if he could, but, nothing was being made available to him. And so as the story goes on, he finds himself, he comes to himself. He actually, realizes that, you know what, his life could be better as a servant in his dad's house than it is right now. So he decides he's going back to his father's house, and he's going to tell his dad, you know, hey, I made a wrong decision. You know, I did something that's wrong, and, you know, I actually am asking you to basically forgive me for this. And, you know, to really, he's willing to come back and be his dad's servant. But as the, you know, as God would have it, as God's account of this whole thing to us is, you know, the father sees his son coming back down the road. And so how does he forgive? He doesn't, lecture the son. He doesn't say anything. He sees his son coming after his son has come to himself, really gotten himself, together to know that what he made a wrong choice and really is coming back to turn things around. When his dad sees his son along the path, and it's really a picture of God's love towards us. The dad runs to the son and meets him along the way. He welcomes him home. He puts a ring on his finger, which symbolizes that he's certainly part of the family, certainly a part of who his dad is still. And so he forgives his son. And that story that, that Christ said or gave us is really a picture of how God loves us and his love for us. So when we're willing to allow God in, God doesn't, there's no account of God ever chasing anybody down the road and trying to, get people and dragging them back or anything like that. And so that's certainly not what we should be doing as well. But, a space where, someone has, gotten their mindset together, then, there's an opportunity for us to forgive by welcoming them back. If that is what, what we are able to do in that space, or what we are, willing to do in that space. Right. And so again, forgiveness doesn't always mean continuing on with somebody, but if they have really turned things around, and if there's space in your life to really allow them back in, and and you're willing to do it, that is a pathway to forgiveness that God has given us an example of. And so the other thing that I want to say quickly, beyond the story of the parable of the prodigal son that we just talked about, that God has certainly given us the example of forgiveness in his son, Jesus Christ. And so in the fact that, Christ came and actually, in order to reconnect us back to God, he actually came to, to do that on our behalf. And so that's the love of God, then, the love of the Son of God and everything on our behalf. And so God has given us two great examples of forgiveness. And we're not suggesting that you lay down your life for anybody who's actually offended us at the dinner table, or, been rude to us, or whether it's been a family conflict. We're not suggesting that at all. But what we are suggesting is that you begin the process, and that we begin the process of really healing that situation and healing ourselves in the whole process of forgiveness. And so how can we do it? One way we can do it is simply by forgiving the most recent offense that happened this holiday season, this Christmas season, and starting there and then moving on from there. And again, by allowing God in to help guide us, by seeking the counseling, the good counseling from a great counselor, that someone who knows God, that who can help us along the path, and by allowing those two things to help us retool, relearn how to be, kind in their space, how to be patient, and really using the opportunities that God has when he will remind us that, hey, you can pray for this person, or if there's an opportunity to pray over the food, the dinner table, you can pray with this person, and you can retool and sharpen the tools that we need to really be, kinder to them, and to really, practice not being rude and things like that. And so God will help us along that path, and certainly good counseling will help us as well. So please take, note of that, and please make use of those two things as we seek to move along the path. And we'll know that we're getting better in a couple of things. We'll know that by how we talk about the situation, or about the person, or with that person. We'll know by how we act towards that person, and we'll also know beyond how we think about that person. And so those things will start to change as well. And so our mindset towards them will change, our actions toward them will start to change, because we'll start seeing them differently, the way that God probably would have us see them, as a person who may have been hurt along the way, who may have something that they need to work through in order to be a better person. And so we'll start seeing things the way God sees them, and the people the way God sees them, and then we'll be able to really to effectively move on, and to to make our lives better by forgiving their behavior, and forgiving the situation at hand. So thank you again. I'll say for joining Straight Up Now Tell Me, and for hearing the topic on being offended and on forgiveness. And certainly we do know that that is a tough topic to hear. But again, two things: add God to the situation, add a good counselor who knows God to the situation, and so that we can begin to do the work that will allow us to forgive.